My name is Sharon, 67 years old, and I never thought my peaceful retirement in Portland would be shattered by a doorbell at 3 in the morning. After 30 years as a school counselor, I was enjoying my quiet routines until that night. The sound jolted me awake, and when I opened the door, my heart sank. There stood Jessica, my always composed 38-year-old daughter, with swollen eyes, shaking uncontrollably. Her first words cut deep. "Mom, Ryan took everything and left." If you've ever had your world turned upside down in an instant, let me know where you're watching from and subscribe to follow our journey through betrayal to healing. The relationship between Jessica and I had always been special. As my only daughter, we shared a bond that went beyond mother and child. We were confidence friends and each other's biggest supporters. I watched her grow from an inquisitive little girl into a determined young woman who excelled academically and professionally. Jessica graduated with honors from Northwestern University with a business degree and quickly climbed the corporate ladder at a prestigious marketing firm in Portland. By 30, she was already an executive director managing major accounts. Her drive and intelligence made her a natural leader, and I couldn't have been prouder. She met Ryan 8 years ago at an industry conference. He was charismatic, well-spoken, and worked in financial planning. When Jessica brought him home for dinner the first time, I noticed how attentive he was, complimenting my home and asking thoughtful questions about my teaching career. Still, something about his charm felt rehearsed, and I noticed how he casually mentioned his luxury watch and recent European vacation. "He's quite the spender," I mentioned cautiously after he left. Jessica waved off my concern. "He works hard, Mum. He deserves nice things." Despite my mild reservations, their wedding 16 months later was beautiful. Ryan spared no expense, insisting on a lavish venue overlooking the Columbia River. 200 guests, custom everything, and a 10-day honeymoon in the Maldives. When I gently asked about the budget, Jessica assured me they could afford it. "Ryan says these are investments in memories, Mum. Don't worry." The first 3 years of their marriage seemed picture perfect. They bought a stunning 4-bedroom house in the West Hills, took exotic vacations twice a year, and drove matching luxury cars. From the outside, they were living the dream. But gradually, I started noticing subtle changes. Jessica began working longer hours, often cancelling our weekly lunch dates last minute. When we did meet, she looked tired with dark circles under her eyes. "Just a big project," she would say, checking her phone constantly throughout our conversations. Meanwhile, Ryan's career seemed to stall. He left his financial planning position to start his own consultancy, which apparently never quite took off. Jessica became vague when I asked about his work, changing the subject quickly. I later discovered she had been supporting them almost entirely on her salary for the past 2 years. Family gatherings became less frequent. Every holiday I would invite them over, but increasingly heard excuses about work commitments or prior engagements. When they did attend, the dynamic between them felt off. Ryan would answer questions directed at Jessica, his hand always possessively on her lower back. She grew quieter, her usual confident opinions replaced by quick glances at Ryan before responding. Our phone conversations became shorter and less personal. Instead of our usual hour-long chats, Jessica would call for 15 minutes between meetings, sounding distracted and guarded. When I asked deeper questions about her life or marriage, she redirected with surface-level updates about work projects or home renovations. "Everything's fine, Mum, just busy," became her standard response. 6 months ago they came for dinner, and I noticed Jessica barely touched her wine, something unusual for our traditional Sunday dinners. Ryan, however, finished a bottle nearly by himself, becoming increasingly boastful about a real estate opportunity he was exploring. "It's going to be huge," he said, pouring another glass. "I'm talking serious returns." Jessica smiled tightly and changed the subject. Later, while Ryan was watching football in the living room, I found Jessica alone in the kitchen, staring blankly out the window. "Everything okay, sweetheart?" I asked. She startled slightly. "Of course, just tired from work." "You know you can tell me anything," I said, squeezing her hand. Something flashed in her eyes, but then Ryan appeared in the doorway. "We should head out soon, babe. Early meeting tomorrow." Jessica nodded quickly and pulled away. As they left, Ryan made a comment that stuck with me. When Jessica mentioned stopping to get cash for the house cleaner, he frowned. "I'll transfer the money. You don't need to withdraw cash without discussing it first." Jessica's face flushed with embarrassment as she glanced at me, and I noticed how quickly she apologized to him. For a woman who managed million-dollar marketing budgets, it seemed odd that she needed permission for such a small expense. After they left, I sat in my kitchen for a long time. Something felt wrong. The daughter who had once been fiercely independent now seemed to shrink in her husband's presence. The successful career woman who managed major corporate accounts apparently needed approval for household expenses. My motherly intuition was screaming that something wasn't right, but I didn't know how to reach through the walls Jessica had built around her marriage. I tried calling more often, suggesting mother-daughter outings, even offering to visit them instead. Each attempt was met with polite deflection. Our relationship, once so close, had become a series of surface-level interactions, carefully managed and increasingly rare. I never imagined that the next meaningful conversation with my daughter would happen in the middle of the night, with her world completely shattered. That night began like any other in my quiet retirement routine. After a light dinner of soup and salad, I settled into my reading chair by the bay window with a new mystery novel and a cup of chamomile tea. At 67, I'd come to appreciate these peaceful evenings, with nothing but the soft ticking of my grandfather clock and the occasional turn of a page breaking the silence. Around 10, I drew a warm bath, adding a few drops of lavender oil as my small luxury. Afterwards, I went through my nightly routine moisturizer, checking doors and windows, setting my alarm for my morning walk. By 11, I was in bed reading one more chapter before switching off my bedside lamp. I fell asleep quickly, as I usually did. The medication I took for mild hypertension tended to make me sleep deeply, which is why the sound of my doorbell at 3:17 in the morning was so jarring. The harsh, insistent ringing pulled me from deep sleep, and for a moment I couldn't orient myself. My heart raced as I fumbled for my glasses and bedside lamp. No one rings a doorbell at that hour with good news. My first thought was that something had happened to my sister in Seattle, or perhaps my neighbor Tom had another health emergency. I pulled on my robe with shaking hands, hurrying down the hallway. Through the peephole, I could make out a figure on my porch, but in the dim porch light, I couldn't immediately tell who it was. "Who is it?" I called, my finger hovering over the emergency button on my phone. "Mum, it's me. Please open the door." Jessica's voice sounded strained, almost unrecognizable. I unlocked the door immediately, swinging it open to find my daughter standing there in a state I'd never seen before. Jessica, who had always been meticulously put together since high school, looked utterly broken. Her business casual clothes, normally pristine, were wrinkled and mismatched. Her dark hair, usually styled perfectly, hung limply around her face. But it was her eyes that frightened me most. Red-rimmed and swollen, they held a vacant, shocked expression I'd only seen in people experiencing profound trauma. She was shaking visibly, her arms wrapped around herself as if physically holding herself together. "Jessica, sweetheart, what happened?" I reached for her and she fell into my arms with a weight that nearly knocked me back, a sob escaping her throat. I managed to guide her inside and to the living room sofa where she collapsed, her body racked with sobs that seemed to come from somewhere deep and primal. I wrapped my softest throw blanket around her shoulders and sat beside her, holding her trembling hands. "I'm going to get you some water," I said, after a few minutes, alarmed by her continued shaking. In the kitchen, I filled a glass with water and grabbed a box of tissues, my mind racing through terrible possibilities. An accident. A health diagnosis. Had something happened to one of her friends? When I returned, Jessica had drawn her knees up to her chest, making herself small on my sofa. She took the water with both hands, but they shook so badly that some spilled onto the blanket. I steadied the glass, helping her take small sips. For several minutes, she couldn't speak coherently, just fractured phrases between sobs. "I didn't know. I trusted him. Everything's gone." I sat with her stroking her hair as I had when she was little, waiting for the storm to pass, enough for her to form complete sentences. In those moments, maternal instinct took over. Whatever had happened, my daughter needed a safe harbor. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, Jessica took a deep, shuddering breath and looked up at me, her face a mask of devastation. "He took everything," she whispered. Before I could ask who she meant, her phone buzzed in her pocket. Then again, and again. With trembling hands, she pulled it out, and I could see a cascade of banking alerts lighting up her screen. "Ryan," she said, his name sounding like something bitter in her mouth. "He emptied our accounts tonight. All of them." My confusion quickly gave way to anger as I began to understand. "Your husband did this. Where is he now?" Jessica's laugh was hollow, nothing like her usual warm chuckle. "Cabo San Lucas, with his girlfriend." The story spilled out of her in jagged pieces. She had been working late, finishing a major presentation for a client meeting the next morning. When she finally got home around 11, the house felt different. Emptier somehow. Ryan's closet was open, sections of it bare. His travel luggage was gone. At first, she thought he might have taken a last-minute business trip. She called his cell, but it went straight to voicemail. Thinking he might have left a note in his home office, she went in, something she rarely did out of respect for his privacy. "The safe was open, Mum," she said, her voice breaking again. "The cash we kept for emergencies, my grandmother's jewelry, the bonds Dad left me, all gone." Panicking, she checked their shared laptop, finding it still logged into his email. That's where she found the airline confirmation. 2 first-class tickets to Cabo San Lucas, departed earlier that evening. 2 names, Ryan Williams and Alicia Kenton. "I called our bank," Jessica continued, her voice steadying slightly, as she recounted the practical steps she had taken, always the problem solver, even in crisis. "They confirmed large transfers had been made from all our accounts over the past 3 days. Everything we had, Mum. Our savings checking even my personal account that I thought only I had access to." She had driven to his office downtown, using her copy of the key to let herself in, hoping to find some explanation. Instead, she found an emptied desk and a letter addressed to her. Jessica reached into her purse and pulled out a folded paper, handing it to me with a trembling hand. The letter was brief and devastating in its callousness. "Jessica, by the time you read this, I'll be gone. Our marriage has been over for a long time, we both know that. I've found someone who understands me in ways you never could. I've taken what I need to start over. Don't try to find me. Ryan." "But we were fine," Jessica whispered, confusion mixing with her pain. "We had dinner together last night. He kissed me goodbye this morning." Her phone buzzed again with another bank alert. She looked down at it and let out a sound between a laugh and a sob. "He just cleared out my 401k. $23,000 penalty for early withdrawal." She looked up at me, her eyes wide with shock. "He's taking everything, Mum. Systematically. While I sit here, he's still doing it." I took her phone gently and turned it off. "We'll deal with all of this in the morning. Right now, you need to rest." But Jessica shook her head, a sudden urgency in her movements. "I can't rest. Don't you understand? He's been planning this for months. This isn't impulsive. This is calculated. And I never saw it coming." The full weight of the betrayal was beginning to settle on her, as shock gave way to comprehension. Her husband of 7 years, the man she had built a life with, had been systematically preparing to abandon her, while simultaneously draining their financial resources. And all while maintaining the facade of a normal marriage. As the realization hit her fully, Jessica broke down again, this time with a depth of anguish that frightened me. This wasn't just the end of a marriage or a financial crisis. This was a fundamental shattering of her reality and trust. I held my daughter until dawn, broke her sobs, eventually giving way to the heavy breathing of exhaustion. As she finally fell asleep on my shoulder, I looked down at her face, tear-stained and vulnerable in sleep. The strong, confident woman I had raised now looked as fragile as she had as a newborn. I made a silent promise to her then. Whatever happened next, she wouldn't face it alone. The full extent of the financial devastation became clear the next morning. Jessica woke after a few hours of fitful sleep, her eyes puffy, but now focused with a determination I recognized. She had always been resilient, even as a child, and I could see her gathering her strength to face whatever came next. Over strong coffee at my kitchen table, Jessica opened her laptop and began methodically logging into their financial accounts. With each login, the grim picture grew clearer. "Our joint checking account," she said, turning the screen toward me. "The balance $11.32. It had over $20,000 yesterday." She moved to the next account. Their joint savings, which she had mentioned, contained their house down payment fund for a vacation property they had been considering. Balance $0. "What about your personal accounts?" I asked, hoping she had maintained some financial separation. Jessica's expression tightened. "I'm checking that now." She typed in credentials for her personal account, one she had mentioned Ryan wasn't supposed to have access to. When the page loaded, her sharp intake of breath told me everything. $416 left, she whispered, out of nearly 40,000. One by one, we went through every account. Retirement funds depleted with massive penalties for early withdrawal. Investment accounts liquidated. Even the account Jessica had set up specifically for her niece's college fund had been emptied. How could he access all these accounts? I asked, struggling to understand the mechanics of such a comprehensive financial attack. Jessica's laugh was bitter. "Because I trusted him, Mom. He was a financial planner, remember? He set up most of these accounts. And apparently he made sure he had access to everything." She rubbed her temples. "I gave him my passwords when I went on that business trip to Tokyo last year. He said he needed to make an emergency transfer while I was unreachable on the flight." As the morning progressed, the situation only worsened. Jessica called their mortgage company and discovered something that made her physically recoil. "He took out a second mortgage on our house 3 weeks ago," she said after hanging up, her voice hollow. $300,000. The woman I spoke with said I signed the paperwork." Jessica looked up at me, her eyes wide. "Mum, I never signed anything." The implications were clear forgery on top of theft. The calculated nature of Ryan's betrayal was becoming increasingly apparent. This wasn't an impulsive act, but a meticulously planned extraction. Next came the credit cards. Jessica had maintained excellent credit her entire adult life, something she had been proud of. Now, as she logged into each account, she found them all maxed out with unexplainable charges. $7,000 at a jewelry store in downtown Portland 2 weeks ago, she read, scrolling through the transactions. $5,000 at a boutique I've never heard of. Hotel charges, restaurant bills for places I've never been. Her voice caught. "He was treating her with my money, Mum. For months." As Jessica continued her financial archaeology, more evidence of Ryan's double life emerged. She found receipts for weekend trips when he had claimed to be at business conferences, charges for couples massages during times he had told her he was meeting with clients, a trail of deceit mapped out in transaction records. "Look at this," Jessica said, pointing to a series of charges from 3 days ago. First-class airfare to Mexico, 2 tickets $17,000. A 5-star resort in Cabo, $8,000 for the week. He didn't even try to hide it at the end. While Jessica was on hold with another credit card company, a text message notification appeared on her phone. It was from her friend Megan, with a screenshot attached. With trembling fingers, Jessica opened it, then wordlessly handed me her phone. The screenshot was from Instagram, showing Ryan on a beach with his arm around a young blonde woman, both holding tropical drinks. The caption read, "New beginnings with my soulmate. The future is bright." It had been posted 2 hours ago. Jessica stared at the image, her expression shifting from shock to a cold anger. "He tagged the resort," she said quietly. "He wants me to see this." By noon, Jessica had made more than a dozen calls to financial institutions, creditors, and their joint accountant. The picture that emerged was devastating. Ryan had systematically liquidated approximately $300,000 from their various accounts. Additionally, he had maxed out credit cards in Jessica's name to the tune of $70,000. With the fraudulent second mortgage, the total financial damage exceeded $600,000. Jessica called their attorney explaining the situation and asking about immediate legal options. The response wasn't encouraging. Yes, she could certainly pursue legal action, but these matters took time. Freezing remaining assets, contesting fraudulent charges, and pursuing recovery would be a lengthy process. Even proving the second mortgage was obtained fraudulently would require investigation. "What about my job?" Jessica suddenly asked, looking at the time. "I have a major presentation today." The realization that her personal catastrophe didn't stop the rest of the world hit her hard. She was a senior executive with significant responsibilities. Already her phone was filling with messages from colleagues wondering why she hadn't arrived at the office. "I can't face them," she whispered. "Not today. Not like this." I watched as Jessica, who had never missed a day of work due to personal issues, composed an email to her boss requesting emergency personal leave. Her hands shook as she typed, and I could see the professional cost of this crisis beginning to register alongside the personal and financial ones. As the afternoon wore on and the adrenaline began to fade, the emotional reality crashed over Jessica in waves. She paced my living room, alternating between rage and despair. "7 years, Mom," she said, her voice breaking. 7 years of building a life together. All those nights I worked late to support us when his business was struggling. The vacations I skipped so we could save for the future. Our future. She stopped suddenly, her breathing becoming rapid and shallow. There never was an our future, only his. I guided her to the couch as she began to hyperventilate, recognizing the signs of a panic attack. "Breathe with me, sweetheart," I said, holding her hands firmly. "In through your nose, out through your mouth, slowly." Jessica tried to follow my instructions, but the panic had overwhelmed her. "I can't breathe," she gasped. "Mom, I can't." I held her tightly as she struggled for breath, her body trembling violently. "You're safe," I repeated, stroking her hair. "You're not alone. We'll get through this." Gradually her breathing steadied, but the panic gave way to deep, gut-wrenching sobs. I held my daughter as she cried, her body curled against mine like when she was small. But these weren't a child's tears over a skinned knee or a broken toy. These were the sobs of an adult whose entire life had been shattered by someone she had trusted completely. "How did I not see this coming?" she kept asking between sobs. "How could I have been so blind?" I had no answer that wouldn't sound like a platitude. The truth was, love often blinds us to red flags. Trust makes us vulnerable, and someone determined to deceive can maintain a convincing facade, especially with those who love them most. As the sun began to set on that first terrible day, Jessica had cried herself into exhaustion. The immediate financial triage was done, accounts frozen, fraud alerts placed, preliminary legal advice received. But the real work of rebuilding a life torn apart by betrayal was just beginning. The next morning, Jessica insisted on going to her house to collect important documents and personal belongings. I was concerned it was too soon, that being in the space she had shared with Ryan would trigger fresh trauma, but she was adamant. "I need to see it," she said firmly. "I need to see what else he took, what else he lied about." I drove her to the beautiful Tudor-style home in the West Hills that they had purchased 3 years ago. Jessica's hands trembled as she unlocked the front door, and I stayed close behind her as she stepped inside. The house was eerily quiet and felt strangely hollow despite most of the furniture remaining in place. Jessica moved through the main floor like a detective, noting what was missing, what had been disturbed. "His golf clubs are gone," she noted, looking in the hall closet. "And the painting we bought in Santa Fe." Her voice was clinical, detached, as if cataloguing a stranger's possessions. It was when we reached Ryan's home office that things took a darker turn. Jessica had rarely entered this room respecting it as Ryan's private workspace. Now she opened the door with purpose, her jaw set in determination. The office appeared largely untouched at first glance, The mahogany desk still organized bookshelves still filled with financial volumes and family photos. But when Jessica began opening drawers and examining the computer, the facade crumbled. "The external hard drive is gone," she said, looking behind the desktop. "And his filing cabinet." She tried a drawer, finding it unlocked when it was typically secured. Empty. She sat at his desk and turned on the computer, half expecting it to be wiped clean. Surprisingly, it booted normally. "He was always so careful about logging out," Jessica murmured, finding the desktop accessible. "He must have left in a hurry at the end." What we discovered over the next 2 hours revealed the elaborate double life Ryan had been leading. In an email folder labeled Property Investments that had been left open, Jessica found over a year's worth of correspondence with someone named Alicia. "That's her," Jessica said tonelessly, pointing to a name in the email chain. "Alicia Kenton." The emails started professionally discussing potential real estate investments, but they quickly became personal, then intimate. Jessica read through them with a growing sense of horror, discovering that Ryan's relationship with Alicia had begun over 2 years ago, not recently as she had assumed. "He told her I was cold and career-obsessed," Jessica read, her voice catching. "He said we hadn't been intimate in years." She looked up at me, eyes wide with disbelief. "We were together just last week, Mum." The deeper we dug, the more calculated the betrayal appeared. Ryan had created detailed spreadsheets tracking Jessica's work schedule, noting when she had late meetings or business trips. These times corresponded with hotel bookings and dinner reservations with Alicia. In a password-protected folder that Ryan had apparently forgotten to secure before leaving, Jessica found records of secret cryptocurrency investments and offshore accounts that had never been mentioned to her. "He's been planning this for at least 18 months, Jessica said, scrolling through transaction records. Small transfers at first, building up over time. Perhaps most disturbing was a folder containing photos. Unlike the posed, filtered image on Instagram, these were intimate moments, Ryan and Alicia looking at properties in Mexico, having dinner with people Jessica didn't recognize, celebrating what appeared to be Alicia's birthday. "They have a whole life together," Jessica whispered, staring at the images. "A whole separate life." As Jessica continued searching, her phone chimed with a text message. It was from a number she didn't recognize. She opened it hesitantly. "Is this Jessica Williams?" the message read. "This is Alicia. I think we need to talk." Jessica's hand shook so badly she nearly dropped the phone. "She's texting me, Mum. The girlfriend is texting me." Against my advice, Jessica responded, "What could you possibly have to say to me?" The reply came quickly. "I just found out about you. Well, I mean, I knew Ryan was married, but he told me you knew about us, that you had an arrangement." Jessica stared at the screen in disbelief. "An arrangement?" He told her I knew. More messages followed, revealing that Ryan had told Alicia that Jessica had agreed to a divorce months ago and that they were simply finalizing financial settlements. According to Ryan, Jessica was wealthy from family money and had agreed to finance his fresh start with Alicia as part of their separation agreement. "She thought I was funding their new life," Jessica said, her voice rising in outrage. "She thought I approved of all this." I took the phone gently from Jessica's hands. "This isn't helping right now, sweetheart. We can deal with her later." Jessica nodded numbly and returned to searching the office. In the back of a drawer, she found something that made her gasp. Divorce papers already drawn up, needing only her signature. The documents were dated 3 months earlier and included financial terms that would have left Jessica with substantial debt, while Ryan walked away with most of their liquid assets. "He was going to trick me into signing these," she said, her hands shaking. "Probably tell me they were for refinancing the house or something." The premeditated nature of the betrayal was becoming clearer with each discovery. This wasn't a man who had fallen in love with someone else and made a poor decision in the heat of emotion. This was a calculated long-term scheme to extract maximum financial benefit while causing maximum emotional damage. As we continued through the house, Jessica discovered her jewelry box had been emptied of all valuable pieces, including family heirlooms from her grandmother. The safe in their bedroom closet, which had contained emergency cash and important documents, was open and barren. Just as we were preparing to leave, Jessica's phone rang. It was her colleague Stephanie calling with alarming news. "Jess, I don't know what's going on, but Ryan called Brad yesterday," she said, referring to their company's CEO. "He told him you've been under tremendous stress and having some kind of breakdown. Said you've been making erratic financial decisions and might need a leave of absence." Jessica sat heavily on the edge of the bed. "He's trying to undermine me at work," she said after hanging up. "He's trying to destroy my professional credibility too." As the pieces came together, we realized this wasn't just financial betrayal, but a comprehensive campaign to isolate and undermine Jessica in every aspect of her life. Looking back, the signs had been there. Ryan had gradually distanced Jessica from her friends, always with plausible excuses. He had inserted himself into her professional relationships whenever possible. He had created subtle tensions between Jessica and me, often by accidentally forgetting to relay messages or misrepresenting conversations. "He was isolating me," Jessica said, as we drove back to my house, the reality dawning on her, "making me more dependent on him while secretly planning to leave." The scale and cruelty of the betrayal was almost incomprehensible. Ryan hadn't just stolen money and had an affair. He had systematically worked to dismantle Jessica's support system, professional standing, and self-confidence while presenting a loving facade. When we returned to my home, Jessica was quiet for a long time, sitting at the kitchen table staring at her hands. When she finally spoke, her voice was small, but contained a clarity that had been absent since she arrived at my door. "This isn't just betrayal, Mum," she said. "This is abuse." The word hung in the air between us, heavy with implication, but undeniably accurate. What Ryan had done went beyond infidelity or financial misconduct. It was a calculated campaign to harm someone who had trusted him completely. In that moment, I saw a flash of the strong, perceptive woman Jessica had always been. Despite the devastation, she was beginning to see the situation clearly. It would be a long road back, but that single moment of clarity gave me hope that my daughter would eventually find her way through this darkness. The weeks following the discovery of Ryan's betrayal were some of the darkest I've ever witnessed. Jessica, always so vibrant and determined, seemed to collapse inward. She moved into my guest room but barely left it except to use the bathroom. Food held no interest for her, and she lost weight rapidly, her clothes hanging loosely on her frame. Her company had granted her emergency personal leave after she finally explained the situation to her boss, but the respite came with its own consequences. Without work to focus on, Jessica had nothing to distract her from the constant cycle of shock, grief, and rage that consumed her. And while her immediate supervisor was sympathetic, rumors had already begun spreading through the office, fueled by Ryan's earlier calls suggesting Jessica was unstable. By the third week, Jessica had been placed on probation, ostensibly for her extended absence, but likely influenced by the seeds of doubt Ryan had planted. Her career, which had been a source of such pride and identity, now hung in the balance alongside everything else she had lost. I tried everything I could think of to help her. I prepared her favorite meals, suggested short walks, brought her books and magazines. Most went untouched. Jessica existed in a limbo of pain, unable to move forward, but tormented by looking back. One night around 3 a.m, I woke to use the bathroom and noticed light spilling from beneath Jessica's door. Concerned, I knocked softly. "Jess, are you okay?" When there was no answer, I gently opened the door to find Jessica sitting cross-legged on the bed, her laptop open, illuminating her gaunt face in the darkness. She was scrolling through Ryan's social media accounts, studying images of him and Alicia enjoying their new life in Mexico. "You shouldn't be looking at that, sweetheart," I said softly, sitting beside her. "They look so happy," Jessica said, her voice empty of emotion. "He's having the time of his life while I'm falling apart." I closed the laptop gently. "This isn't helping you heal." Jessica didn't resist, but the vacant look in her eyes frightened me. "What if I don't want to heal, Mum? What if there's nothing left to heal?" The hopelessness in her voice sent a chill through me. I had counseled hundreds of students through crises during my career, but nothing had prepared me for the depth of despair I was witnessing in my own daughter. The following days, Jessica's condition worsened. She stopped showering, stopped changing her clothes. She would stare at her phone for hours, waiting for bank alerts or messages from their attorney, cataloguing each new financial attack, as Ryan continued systematically dismantling their shared assets from abroad. 4 weeks after Jessica arrived at my door, I came home from grocery shopping to find her sitting at my kitchen table, a glass of water before her and an open bottle of sleeping pills nearby. My heart stopped as I took in the scene, the grocery bag slipping from my hands. "Jessica," I said carefully, trying to keep my voice steady. "What are you doing?" She looked up at me with red-rimmed eyes. "Thinking," she said simply. I approached slowly and sat across from her, relieved to see the pill count in the bottle seemed unchanged. "Thinking about what? About whether any of this is worth it," she said with a calmness that frightened me more than tears would have. "Everything I built is gone, Mom. My marriage was a lie. My home is mortgaged to the hilt with debt I didn't create. My career is hanging by a thread. My savings are gone." She touched the pill bottle lightly. "I keep wondering if it would be easier to just stop." In that moment, I understood we had reached a crisis point far beyond financial concerns or marital betrayal. My daughter was contemplating whether her life was worth continuing. I reached across the table and took her hands in mine, forcing her to look at me. "Jessica Ann Williams, you listen to me. The man who did this to you does not get to determine your worth or your future. He does not get to win." Something flickered in her vacant eyes, the faintest spark of the fighter I knew lived inside her. "I know exactly how you feel," I continued, holding her gaze. "When your father left us for his secretary when you were 8, I thought my life was over too." Jessica blinked in surprise. Though she knew her father had left us, I had always softened the details, wanting to preserve whatever relationship they might have. I had never told her the full truth. "Your father emptied our accounts too," I said quietly. "Not as thoroughly as Ryan, but enough to leave us in serious trouble. I found out he'd been planning it for over a year, establishing a new life while maintaining the facade of our marriage." Jessica stared at me truly, seeing me for the first time in weeks. "You never told me." "Because I didn't want you to carry that burden," I explained. "But you need to hear it now. I was 36, with an 8-year-old daughter, no money, and a teaching job that barely covered our basics. I thought about ending things too." I glanced at the pill bottle between us. "I had a similar moment at my kitchen table. But then I looked at school pictures of you on the refrigerator and realized that giving up would mean he won completely, that surviving and eventually thriving would be the best revenge." Jessica's eyes filled with tears, but they were different from the hopeless tears of recent weeks. These held a hint of connection, of understanding. "How did you do it?" she whispered. "How did you keep going?" "One day at a time," I said honestly. "And with help. I couldn't do it alone, and neither can you." That night, after Jessica had finally fallen asleep, I made calls to find a therapist who specialized in trauma and betrayal. It wasn't easy finding someone with immediate availability, but I was determined. Jessica needed professional support beyond what I could provide as her mother. When I presented the idea the next morning, Jessica initially resisted. "I don't need therapy, Mum. I need my money back and Ryan in jail." "You need both," I insisted gently. "This isn't just about finances. What you've experienced is trauma, and it requires proper care." After some resistance, Jessica reluctantly agreed to an initial appointment. I drove her there 3 days later, worried about her severe anxiety as we sat in the waiting room. When her name was called, Jessica froze, suddenly unable to move from her chair. "I can't do this," she whispered, panic rising in her voice. "I can't talk about it with a stranger." I took her trembling hands in mine. "Yes, you can." because you are stronger than you feel right now, and because the alternative is letting him destroy not just your past, but your future too. Something in those words reached her. With visible effort, Jessica stood and followed the therapist into her office, leaving me in the waiting room with my heart in my throat. When she emerged 50 minutes later, her eyes were red from crying, but there was something different in her posture, a slight straightening of her shoulders that hadn't been there before. She didn't speak on the drive home, but that night she showered for the first time in days and asked if I had any clean sweatshirts she could borrow. It was a tiny step, almost imperceptible to anyone who hadn't been watching her sink into despair. But to me, it represented something monumental, the first sign that my daughter might find her way back from the darkness that had consumed her. That night, as I lay in bed listening for any sounds of distress from Jessica's room, I realized that this was the worst I had ever seen my daughter. Not the tantrums of childhood or the heartbreaks of adolescence, not even the grief when her father largely disappeared from her life. This comprehensive betrayal by the person she had trusted most had brought her closer to giving up than anything in her 38 years. But she had gone to therapy. She had showered. Tiny victories, but victories nonetheless. Tomorrow would bring more challenges, legal meetings, financial paperwork, difficult decisions about the house and her job. The practical aftermath of betrayal would continue to unfold for months, perhaps years. But if Jessica could find the strength to take these first small steps toward healing, I had to believe she could eventually rebuild her life from the ashes Ryan had left behind. 2 months after Jessica arrived at my door, small changes began accumulating. Her twice-weekly therapy sessions seemed to be helping, providing her with tools to process the trauma and betrayal. The vacant look that had frightened me so deeply began to recede, replaced by moments of clarity and determination. Jessica had started taking short walks around my neighborhood initially, just to the end of the block and back, but gradually extending the distance each day. The physical activity brought color back to her cheeks and helped with the insomnia that had plagued her since Ryan's departure. We were sitting at my kitchen table reviewing correspondence from her bank when Jessica suddenly put down the letter she was reading and looked up with an expression I hadn't seen in months: resolve. "I want to pursue criminal charges," she said firmly. "Not just the civil case. I want him to face real consequences." This was a significant shift. Until now, Jessica had been focused on damage control, working with her bank to contest fraudulent transactions and with her attorney to protect what assets remained. The idea of actively pursuing Ryan, rather than just defending against his attacks, marked a turning point. "Are you sure?" I asked, cautious, but encouraged by her newfound determination. Jessica nodded. "I've been reading about financial abuse cases. What Ryan did isn't just immoral, it's illegal. Forgery, fraud, identity theft." Her voice grew stronger with each word. "I'm not his only victim, Mum. I'm sure of it. There will be others if he isn't stopped." The next day, Jessica made an appointment with a specialized attorney recommended by her therapist, someone who had experience with complex financial fraud cases involving intimate partners. When we arrived at the downtown office, I was struck by the difference in Jessica's demeanor compared to her first therapy appointment. Though still anxious, she walked in with purpose, her file of documents organized meticulously. The attorney, Gabriela Martinez, listened intently as Jessica outlined the situation, occasionally asking clarifying questions, but mostly taking detailed notes. When Jessica finished, Gabriela set down her pen and looked directly at my daughter. "What Ryan did wasn't just a betrayal of trust, Mrs. Williams. It was criminal. Forging your signature on the second mortgage alone is a felony offense. The systematic way he accessed your accounts, especially those you believed were solely in your name, constitutes identity theft and fraud." The validation from a legal professional had a visible impact on Jessica. For weeks she had been questioning herself, wondering if she had somehow contributed to or deserved what happened. Hearing someone with authority clearly name Ryan's actions as criminal rather than merely unethical seemed to lift a weight from her shoulders. Can we get my money back? Jessica asked, the practical concern still foremost in her mind. Gabriella was honest but encouraging. Recovery is always challenging in these cases, especially with funds moved internationally. But we have some advantages. The paper trail is clear. The timeline of transactions creates an unmistakable pattern of premeditated fraud. And, she added, tapping Jessica's file, you've done excellent work documenting everything. That night, Jessica slept through the night for the first time since arriving at my home. When she came down for breakfast the next morning, there was a subtle but unmistakable change in her energy. I need to go back to work, she announced over coffee. Not full-time yet, but I need to start reconnecting with my career. This too was a breakthrough. Jessica's identity had always been strongly tied to her professional accomplishments. Ryan had deliberately targeted this aspect of her life, with his calls to her colleagues suggesting mental instability. Reclaiming her professional self was a crucial step in her recovery. Jessica reached out to her boss, negotiating a part-time return that would allow her to continue therapy while gradually resuming her responsibilities. To her relief, several key clients had specifically requested her return, their loyalty outweighing the whispers of instability Ryan had tried to plant. As Jessica began taking these steps to rebuild her life, other aspects of her recovery fell into place. She reconnected with friends she had neglected during her marriage, discovering that many had harbored concerns about Ryan's controlling behavior, but hadn't known how to express them. Her friend Stephanie, in particular, became a crucial support, inviting Jessica for weekend brunches and sending encouraging texts during difficult days. When Stephanie admitted she had never trusted Ryan, but had kept silent out of fear of hurting Jessica, it confirmed that the red flags had been visible to others, even when Jessica couldn't see them herself. "Why didn't I see it, Mum?" Jessica asked one evening as we sat on my porch watching the sunset. Looking back, there were so many warning signs. "Because you loved him," I said simply, "and because he was very, very good at manipulation. Professional con artists are experts at gaining trust." A week later, Jessica's attorney called with news that changed the trajectory of her recovery. During the investigation into the fraudulent second mortgage, Jessica remembered a folder of financial documents she had stored in their home office closet paperwork from before their marriage that Ryan might have overlooked. With permission from the bank, we returned to the house to search for these documents. Behind a box of old tax returns, Jessica found the forgotten folder containing statements from accounts she had closed shortly after their wedding, consolidating everything into joint accounts at Ryan's suggestion. "These might prove ownership of my original assets," Jessica explained, as she carefully examined the yellowing papers. But the folder contained something far more valuable, a notebook, in which Jessica had meticulously recorded all assets she brought into the marriage, along with account numbers and approximate values. Most crucially, the notebook included original statements showing transfers from her premarital accounts into their joint accounts, creating a clear paper trail of which funds had originally been hers. "This is exactly what we needed," Jessica's attorney exulted when presented with the documents. "This creates a clear distinction between your premarital assets and joint marital property. The fact that he liquidated funds you can prove were yours originally strengthens both the civil and criminal cases significantly." That night, Jessica changed all her passwords and security questions for every account and service. It was a small act of reclamation, but symbolically powerful. "He doesn't get to have access to any part of my life anymore," she said, as she worked through the list, methodically erasing Ryan's digital footprints from her online identity. As Jessica continued her slow recovery, news about Ryan's paradise with Alicia began filtering back through mutual connections. The relationship that had seemed so perfect on Instagram was showing cracks. A friend who followed Alicia's social media noticed increasingly strained captions and fewer photos of the couple together. "Apparently he's been investing their money in some local business venture," Jessica's friend reported. Alicia posted a cryptic message about trust being earned, not given. When Jessica heard this, she laughed genuinely for the first time in months. "He's doing to her what he did to me," she said, shaking her head. "The leopard doesn't change his spots." This knowledge should have brought only satisfaction, but Jessica's response revealed her growing emotional health. "I actually feel sorry for her," she admitted. She didn't know who she was getting involved with either. The decision to sell the house came 4 months after Ryan's departure. Although Jessica had briefly considered trying to keep it, the emotional associations were too painful, and the fraudulent second mortgage had created complications that made refinancing difficult. "It's just a house," Jessica said, as we walked through it one final time before listing. "It was never really a home." She spent an afternoon removing the last traces of Ryan from the property, taking down photos, packing away gifts he had given her, and donating his remaining clothes to charity. Each item removed seemed to lighten her spirit, the physical unburdening mirroring her emotional one. When a buyer made an offer just slightly below asking price, Jessica accepted immediately, eager to close this chapter of her life. After settling the legitimate mortgage and other expenses, she would have enough to make a fresh start in a small apartment close to her office. "I never thought I'd be 38 and starting over," Jessica confided as we signed the closing papers. "But better now than waking up at 48 or 58 realizing my entire life was built on lies." As Jessica packed her belongings for the move to her new apartment, she came across a framed photo from her wedding day. She studied it for a long moment, looking at Ryan's smiling face, her own joy evident and genuine. "You know what hurts the most, Mum," she said quietly. "I really did love him, and I thought he loved me too." I put my arm around her shoulders. "He may have in his way, but love without respect and honesty isn't really love at all." Jessica nodded slowly, then deliberately placed the photo in the donation box rather than the trash. "I'm not erasing him from my history," she explained. "He happened, but he doesn't get to determine my future." That simple statement, more than anything else, told me my daughter had found her way back to herself. The journey wasn't over, but the turning point had definitively arrived. Jessica was no longer defined by what had been done to her, but by how she was choosing to move forward. 1 year after that terrible night when Jessica appeared at my door, we sat together on the balcony of her new apartment, sharing a bottle of wine and watching the sunset over the Portland skyline. The difference in her was remarkable, like watching someone emerge from a long illness into full health. The court had ruled decisively in Jessica's favor 6 months earlier. Ryan was found guilty of multiple counts of fraud and ordered to repay everything he had taken, plus damages. The reality, of course, was more complicated. Much of the money had been spent or hidden in ways that made full recovery unlikely. But the judgment itself was vindicating a public declaration that Jessica had been wronged and deserved restitution. More importantly, an arrest warrant had been issued for Ryan when he eventually returned to the United States. 2 months ago, we had received word that he had been taken into custody while trying to enter California, apparently after things had soured completely with Alicia in Mexico. "I don't even care about seeing him punished anymore," Jessica had said when we got the news. "I just want to know he can't do this to someone else." Her professional life had not only recovered, but flourished. After returning to work part-time, Jessica had thrown herself into a major project that leveraged her personal experience in an unexpected way, developing a marketing campaign for a financial services company focused on helping women achieve financial literacy and independence. "It's therapeutic," she explained, "using what happened to me to help other women protect themselves." Her work was so impressive that it led to a promotion and a significant raise, allowing her to begin rebuilding her savings more quickly than expected. She had become almost zealous about financial security, maintaining strict boundaries between her accounts and establishing an emergency fund that only she could access. "I learned the hard way that financial independence isn't just about earning your own money," she told me. "It's about controlling it too." Perhaps most encouraging was Jessica's cautious return to dating. A few months ago, she had agreed to coffee with Daniel, a divorced architect she met through a friend. They had been seeing each other casually since then, with Jessica setting clear boundaries and taking things slowly. "He showed me his credit report on our third date." Jessica had laughed, recounting the story. Said he wanted me to know he had nothing to hide. The gesture, while unconventional, had touched her deeply, showing an awareness of and respect for her past trauma. Jessica was careful not to compare every man to Ryan, but she was also no longer willing to ignore red flags or dismiss her intuition when something felt wrong. "I'm not bitter, Mum," she said now, sipping her wine as we watched the sky turn pink and gold. "That's what surprises me most. I thought I'd never trust anyone again, but that's not true. I just trust differently now, more wisely." I studied my daughter's face in the fading light. The haunted look that had consumed her for months after Ryan's betrayal was gone, replaced by a serene confidence that seemed deeper than her pre-crisis self-assurance. This wasn't the blithe confidence of someone who had never been tested, but the hard-won wisdom of someone who had faced her worst fears and survived. "You know, when you showed up at my door that night, I was terrified for you," I admitted. "I wasn't sure you'd ever recover from what he did." Jessica smiled, reaching over to squeeze my hand. "I almost didn't. If it hadn't been for you taking me in, finding me therapy, just being there." She trailed off, emotion making her voice catch. "You saved me, Mum." I shook my head. "No, sweetheart. You saved yourself. I just provided the safe harbor while you gathered your strength." A month earlier, I had experienced a health scare of my own, a bout of pneumonia that had landed me in the hospital for 3 days. Jessica had stepped in immediately, taking time off work to care for me, managing my medications, and staying at my house to help during my recovery. Our roles had temporarily reversed, with her becoming the caregiver and me the vulnerable one. What struck me most during that time was not just Jessica's practical support, but her emotional resilience. Even while worried about me, she had maintained her boundaries and self-care routines, demonstrating a healthy balance that might have eluded her before her crisis. "The other day," Jessica said now, refilling our glasses, "my therapist asked me if I could identify any positive outcomes from what happened with Ryan." I raised an eyebrow. "That seems like a tough question." "It was," Jessica agreed. "But after thinking about it, I realized there are some. I'm more financially literate now than I ever was. I'm more aware of my own strengths. I have deeper friendships because I've learned to be vulnerable with people I trust." She looked at me meaningfully. "And you and I are closer than we've been since I was a teenager." It was true. The crisis had stripped away pretenses and polite distances that had accumulated over the years. In helping Jessica rebuild her life, I had discovered new dimensions to my daughter as an adult, and she had seen me not just as mom, but as a woman who had faced her own challenges and survived. "Would I choose to go through it again? Absolutely not," Jessica continued. "But can I acknowledge that some good came from it?" "Yes." As the sun dipped below the horizon, Jessica shared her newest venture. She had started volunteering at a women's resource center, speaking to groups about financial abuse and the importance of maintaining financial independence, even within marriage. "These women share their stories with me after I speak," she said, her eyes bright with purpose. "So many of them have experienced some version of what happened to me. They just didn't have the resources or support I did." "You're turning your pain into purpose," I observed. "That's real healing." Jessica nodded thoughtfully. "You know what I tell them, that financial abuse isn't just about money. It's about power and control. Ryan didn't just want my money. He wanted to destroy my sense of self, my independence. The ultimate control would have been if I had given up completely." She looked out at the darkening sky, her profile strong against the last light of day. "By rebuilding my life, by refusing to be defined by what he did, I've taken back that power. That's the message I want other women to hear." As we sat in comfortable silence, I reflected on the journey we had both traveled since that terrible night. The path from victim to survivor to thriver isn't linear or predictable. It's full of setbacks, moments of despair, and unexpected challenges. But Jessica had walked that path with increasing confidence, each step taking her further from the shadow Ryan had cast over her life. "So what's next?" I asked, curious about her vision for the future, now that the immediate crisis was well behind her. Jessica smiled, a genuine, unguarded expression that reached her eyes. Living, Mum. Just living on my own terms. That's enough of a victory for now. In that moment, I knew with absolute certainty that my daughter would be more than okay. The betrayal that had nearly destroyed her had ultimately revealed her true strength, a resilience that couldn't be measured in bank balances or relationship status, but in the quiet confidence with which she now faced each day. As the first stars appeared in the evening sky, I raised my glass to her. To new beginnings, I said. Jessica clinked her glass against mine. And to second chances, she added. We all deserve at least one. Have you ever had to rebuild your life after a betrayal or unexpected loss? I would love to hear your stories in the comments below. Sometimes sharing our experiences helps others know they are not alone in their struggles. If this story resonated with you, please like and subscribe to hear more journeys of resilience and healing. And remember, the greatest revenge against those who try to break us is to rebuild ourselves stronger than before. Thank you for listening, and until next time, take care of yourselves and each other.